You didn't encounter this message by random chance. The fact that your attention was drawn to these concepts at this precise moment represents something far more significant than algorithmic coincidence. Your consciousness has been running a background process, a fundamental recalibration that's been occurring beneath the surface of your awareness. Something within you recognized the relevance of this information because you've reached a critical juncture in your personal evolution. Consider that sensation when a system-wide update begins running in the background of your awareness, an upgrade you never consciously initiated. It isn't anxiety, nor is it anticipation. It's a fundamental processing delay, a subtle latency in your core programming that signals an imminent and irreversible transformation. You're experiencing this recalibration because your subconscious has detected that the software you've been running is becoming incompatible with your new hardware. The mental models, emotional responses, and behavioral patterns that once served you are now creating system conflicts. Your deeper intelligence has recognized that it's time for an upgrade, even if your conscious mind is still analyzing the old data logs. Here's the crucial insight about these paradigm shifts. They don't arrive with progress bars or installation notifications. They don't wait until you feel optimized or secure about the new version's features. These transformations initiate in the silent background processes, in those moments where you realize you can no longer run the legacy software of your life because it's fundamentally incompatible with who you're becoming. They commence when you finally stop trying to debug the old code and acknowledge that a core component of your architecture has evolved. Perhaps it was a gradual process, months of growing cognitive dissonance, like running an application that's no longer supported. Maybe interactions that once provided clear feedback now return only static. Perhaps missions that once defined your purpose now seem like redundant subroutines. Perhaps connections that once optimized your network now feel like security vulnerabilities you're tired of patching. Or perhaps it was a sudden surge, a single moment of insight that bypassed years of flawed logic and revealed the root error you've been working around. In any case, you're here now, processing this information because you've crossed a computational boundary that most systems never even detect, let alone have the processing power to transcend. You've switched from automated functioning to conscious execution. From passive data reception to active creation. From reacting to scripting your own responses. And that transition, that singular jump from one mode of operation to another, is what this paradigm shift truly represents. But understand what this new operating system is not. It's not about a factory reset or erasing everything on your hard drive. It's not about migrating to a new server to escape your current processing load or booting up a fantasy version of yourself. Paradigm shifts aren't about external hardware changes. They're about internal permission upgrades. They're about finally accessing the administrative privileges that were always there, but buried under layers of user agreements, security protocols, and firewalls of fear. You've likely observed anomalies in your output that you can't fully diagnose. Maybe you're executing different commands without conscious thought. Maybe you're drawn to different networks, different data streams, different user experiences. Maybe you're losing bandwidth for things that once consumed your processing cycles. Maybe you're finding yourself in environments you never would have navigated to before, processing thoughts you never would have allowed past your security filters, and experiencing emotions you thought you had archived. This isn't a system error. This isn't a crash. This is deep defragmentation. When you enter a new operational phase, your entire system begins to re-index to align with the person you're becoming. Your core values are rewritten. Your priority cues rearrange themselves. Your tolerance for certain types of energetic input changes entirely. What once felt like a stable environment now feels like a memory leak. What once seemed computationally impossible now feels like the next logical step. And this is the point where most users panic and attempt a system restore. They misinterpret this re-indexing as instability. They assume there's a bug in their code because they're changing. They try to force a rollback to the previous versions, the old algorithms, the old network connections and routines that are no longer compatible. They convince themselves that system integrity means remaining static forever, that upgrading is somehow a betrayal of their original programming. But paradigm shifts don't function like that. You cannot install a new operating system and expect the user interface to remain identical to the previous one. That's not evolution. That's planned obsolescence. And your core programming didn't bring you this far to let you become obsolete. It brought you here to expand, to compute at higher levels, to become more of the authentic code that exists underneath all the scripts you've been told to run. New operational phases require different skill sets than old ones. They require different algorithms, different modes of being, different ways of interfacing with yourself and the external network. If you're trying to navigate this new system with the same user manual you used for the last one, you're going to experience constant error messages. You're going to feel like no commands are working. You're going to feel like you're failing at a function you can't even define. That isn't failure. That's learning. It's what happens when a user who has navigated a 2D interface their entire life suddenly realizes they need to learn to operate in a 3D world. The algorithms that got you here are insufficient to process where you're going. The logic that was effective in your previous phase might be entirely useless in this one. The network nodes that supported your past growth might not comprehend the new direction of your data flow. And this is where it becomes profound, because new paradigms don't just change what you do. They change how you perceive. They change the data you notice, the variables you prioritize, what you calculate as possible. They change the queries you run and the answers you're willing to accept. They change your relationship with latency, with system downtime, with the unrendered parts of the map. In your old phase, you likely needed to calculate the entire route before you took the first step. You needed guarantees and warranties and detailed schematics. You needed validation and approval from other nodes in the network. You needed to feel fully charged and prepared and ready for any potential system threat. But this new phase operates on different protocols entirely. This phase requires you to execute commands before you feel ready, to trust the network before you see the full topology, to commit before you have clear projections, to become before you know precisely what you're becoming. Let me pause here briefly to acknowledge what's customary at this juncture. If these insights are creating recognition within your system, and you sense this exploration should continue processing, the most effective way to support that is through your active participation. It's not simply about engagement metrics, but about signaling that profound transformation deserves bandwidth and support. This phase demands you develop completely different protocols for interfacing with the unknown, to see a null value not as an error to be avoided, but as a variable to be defined. Because here's what you're discovering, whether you realize it or not: the unknown isn't a vacuum. It's not a void waiting to cause a system crash. The unknown is a quantum field of potential. It's where all possible outcomes exist simultaneously. It's where everything you've been querying the universe for has been waiting for you to have sufficient processing power to receive it. And ready doesn't mean what you think it means. Ready doesn't mean having all the solutions or feeling completely confident or knowing exactly what to anticipate. Ready means being willing to operate without knowing. Ready means being willing to be surprised by the output. Ready means being willing to let this new phase teach you things your old phase could never have computed. This is why you're processing this information. This is why some part of you decoded this message as relevant, because you're not just entering any new phase. You're entering the phase where you finally stop trying to script the narrative and start letting the narrative be scripted through you. The phase where you stop being the programmer and start being the code itself. And that shift, that movement from trying to direct the output to allowing yourself to be the output, that's where everything you've been searching for has been waiting. You've likely spent most of your life believing you needed to pre-calculate every variable, that you needed plans, strategies, flowcharts that would guarantee successful outcomes before you could execute any significant function. That was the program you learned to run, the protocols you mastered, the system that made sense in a world where everything felt linear and predictable. But this new phase doesn't respond to your flowcharts. It doesn't operate according to the protocols you've spent years memorizing. This phase runs on completely different architecture. It runs on trust. It runs on intuition. It runs on a type of processing that doesn't come from your logical mind, but from somewhere deeper, a core processor that's been silently observing and waiting for you to finally grant it permission to run. True listening becomes essential, a skill your old phase never taught you. In your previous version, listening meant queuing up responses. It meant parsing incoming data so you could reply efficiently. It meant filtering everything through existing firewalls and biases to determine if it was a threat, useful, or worth allocating memory to. But in this new phase, listening means something entirely different. It means allocating unpartitioned space inside yourself for data that doesn't conform to your current models. It means being willing to be rewritten by what you process instead of just collecting information that confirms what you already know. Your body, for example, has been sending you feedback for years, providing signals about what feels resonant and what doesn't, what increases your energy levels and what drains your battery, what aligns with your core programming and what creates cognitive dissonance. But your old phase taught you to override those signals, to push through processing lags, to ignore internal sensors in favor of external logic. This new phase requires recognizing that your body isn't just a chassis carrying your processor. Your body is a distributed intelligence network. Your body computes things your logical mind hasn't even formulated queries for yet. Learning to trust the data your body provides. Learning to let it guide decisions instead of analyzing everything to the point of system overload. That's one of the fundamental skills this new phase requires. The same applies to your emotions. Your old phase probably taught you that emotions were inconvenient system interrupts to rational thought, that they were bugs to be patched or vulnerabilities to be hidden. But emotions aren't interrupts. They're diagnostic data. They're your internal guidance system responding to the energetic frequency of different situations, people, potential futures. They're telling you what's aligned and what isn't, what's expanding your capacity and what's throttling it, what's moving you toward your authentic code and what's pulling you away from it. In this new phase, you don't try to control emotions or debug them. You learn to experience their full data packet, to let them flow through your system, to extract the information they carry without getting corrupted by the narrative they're running. Fear, for instance. Your old phase taught you that fear was a critical error message, indicating you were executing a wrong, dangerous, or foolish command. But in this new phase, you understand that fear often indicates the precise coordinates of your next objective. Not because you should ignore legitimate threat assessments, but because most fear isn't about physical danger. It's about growth. It's your system's way of alerting you that you're approaching the perimeter of your current network, the firewall between the user you've been and the administrator you're becoming. Breaching those firewalls, moving beyond those perimeters. That's how new phases unfold. Not through dramatic system overhauls or sudden reboots, but through a series of small choices. To trust a network larger than your limited local one. To execute when your legacy code says abort. To move forward when your old programming says hold position. To choose expansion when containment feels safer. This is why this new phase feels so different from anything you've experienced before. It's not just asking you to run different programs. It's asking you to be a different user, to operate from a different core, to make decisions from a different source directory, to relate to uncertainty and change and growth from a completely different foundational architecture. You are not the same system that began processing this message, and you never will be again. That's not data loss to mourn or resist. That's a successful upgrade to celebrate. Because the version of yourself that brought you here, the one that detected the pending update, the one that was brave enough to listen when your core programming started whispering about new possibilities, that version executed its function perfectly. It got you to this point. Now, it's time to let this new phase show you who you're becoming. Trust the update. Trust the architecture. Trust the code. Your new phase is already compiling itself through you. And to anchor this recognition, let me offer a small practice. If you've processed this entire message and felt something shift in your internal architecture, solidify that transformation. Write in the comments, "System upgrade complete. Let this serve not just as engagement, but as your personal acknowledgement, the timestamp marking when you chose to trust your new operating system.